Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to talk about how to write about the consequences of major institutional change, and specifically how to show the synthesis between ideas to describe and not just summarize what other people have said, but to create new meaning. This is the last webinar in our series for Summer 2021, but we have more webinars coming up soon, and you can always access recordings of our webinars through our YouTube channel and through our website. Here's a brief extract of some of the many webinars that are available, and with that, let us dive in. So, as I said, we're going to focus on a particular assignment in the EdD program. We're going to talk about how to translate the assignment instructions into an outline to assist with drafting the paper, and we'll conclude with talking about how to show analysis and synthesis more clearly. So, if you just log into Canvas and load up the assignment, we see the assignment instructions here. And as it appears, it's a large block of text. And something that I always like to do when outlining a paper is to take the assignment instructions and apply a little bit of formatting so we can see how these different sections and instructions connect or do not connect. So in this case, we start with the instructions here. And then by adding some bulleting here, we see, oh, yes, so the larger instruction is conduct a case study analysis of an organization that has adopted an innovation and conduct an analysis of the consequences of that adoption. Now within that, what appears here as the second sentence here, or the first bullet on this slide, we see, oh, there's a specific task. Provide the information about the innovation, describing two things: the characteristics of the innovation and the rationale for the organization adopting it. In addition, we have to describe the consequences of the adoption, specifically providing detailed information on the anticipated or unanticipated, desirable and undesirable, and it might be cut off on your view here, the direct or indirect consequences as a result of the adoption. You can see that as the last line of the first paragraph. Then there's also that instruction, okay, the paper should include information on coming from the organization's research on the innovation. So, presumably they made this change with eyes wide open. They did their background research. So, okay, what did they know about it before they adopted it? A little reminder that organization is defined broadly here. So it could be a school, a business, a club. And we want to be writing 3 to 5 pages of body text. That's excluding the cover page. That is excluding any references. You're probably not going to have any appendices here, but they wouldn't be included in that count even if you did have them. All right, so because this is a fairly concise assignment, 3 to 5 pages of body text, that means that you need to be very sure that you are writing exactly what is required and that you take care of that before anything else to make sure you don't run out of room. All right. Now, if we look at the rubric, we see that the grading reflects pretty much the things that we were just looking at. So you need to research and select an organization that's adopted an innovation and give a clear rationale. All right, that's 20% of the grade. 30% is describing the characteristics of the innovation and why it was suitable here, and specific things we see: relative advantage, compatibility, trialability, observability, complexity. So this is basically saying, give us a full-featured description of this innovation and tell us, how is it fitting with the process? How can you view whether it's being effective? Is it hard to adopt? Things like that. And the next one, describe the consequences of the diffusion of the innovation to include information on, and then the 3 things listed before: anticipated or unanticipated, desirable, undesirable, direct, indirect. Now, the main thing, look at that second row in the table, the one that starts to describe the characteristics. So that lists relative advantage, compatibility, trialability, observability, complexity. And let's just back up and look at the slide there. So where it says characteristics of the innovation, we actually are given in the rubric a 5-point way of describing that innovation. So just make sure that when you come to writing the characteristics part, that you make sure you cover all 5, because it is, after all, in the rubric, this is what you are being rated on. And then the last row, that is the 3 sets that we were talking about earlier. So you always want to compare the rubric to the assignment instructions, because sometimes you'll find specific guidelines about what you should be writing that are found in the rubric and will help you be even more specific and efficient in doing what you need to do. Continuing on, so looking at the outlining portion, so this is when you translate the instructions to the form and structure of the paper that you'll be writing. Now, I encourage you to download our APA course paper template and follow along as we go. But for reasons of conciseness, I've gone ahead and extracted a couple things here. So I'll remind you, 3 to 5 pages is not a lot of space for a case study. So make sure you answer all the assignment prompts first. You can always add more detail, but you want to make sure you do all the things that you're being directly graded on first. So from this instruction, the very first line, you will conduct a case study analysis of an organization that has adopted an innovation and conduct an analysis of the consequences of that adoption. So that immediately tells me that we're going to have some headings here. The first one is going to be, we're going to need to describe the organization, so put in a heading for that. Whether you call it description of organization or you have the name of the organization or something like that, the point is to make clear, we're talking about the organization. And also says, that has adopted an innovation, so we need to describe the innovation, hence the heading, adopted innovation, and the consequences of the adoption. So go ahead and put in a heading for that too. And one thing to do, if you print out these instructions, you can go ahead and underline and check off as you go, and just make sure that you are hitting all of the bases outlined in the instruction. Similarly, we can break down the provide the information instruction and say, that's specifying 2 specific things, characteristics and rationale. So that'll be the 3rd level on our outline, the APA level 3 headings, which are flush left, bold, and italicized in title case. And then for describe the consequences, we have that continuum of 3 things that divide into 2 each, so 6 total. Anticipated, unanticipated, desirable, undesirable, direct, and indirect. Now, depending on how much you have to say about these may be things you deal with in 1 paragraph per pair or a paragraph each. It depends on the adoption that you're discussing and how it went with the organization. So, having these headings here, think of them as reminders. You must cover this, but if it doesn't end up being something where that's a whole paragraph there, you can merge them together and have, for example, 1 heading for anticipated and unanticipated consequences. So there's some fluidity there, but you want to make it clear that you are doing that thing that you were required to do. And it's good to start with these headings because that helps you align your topic sentences opening each section with those headings. Now, remember that with the rubric, there is that additional list of characteristics of the innovation. So make sure that you go ahead and copy and paste that. It's probably going to be a sentence or 2, maybe 3 max per each of those items. So I wouldn't necessarily make that another set on the outline, but I would definitely copy and paste that list to make sure you discuss all of them. So what else might you be doing here? Well, before the description of the outline, before the description of the organization, you of course want to have an introduction paragraph, and the introductory paragraph will not have a heading called introduction. That's an APA rule. A heading that just says introduction is considered redundant because we know it's the start of the paper, it's the introduction. So you want to have an introduction paragraph, It may include the outline. The outline may be a separate paragraph depending on how much introduction you have, but one or two paragraphs is usually more than enough to introduce what you're describing, the issue, the innovation, the major content areas of your paper. And then at the end, you're going to want to have a conclusion of sorts, where you say, well, here's what all this means together. Now, whether this is titled conclusion or recommendations or something like that, that is up to you. It kind of depends what format you want to go with your why this matters. But whatever it is, you want to put in a heading for that at the end. And some of the things that you might want to talk about, well, is this a typical or atypical case? What lessons or findings can we glean from this? And how should those lessons or findings be put into practice? Now, if you're wondering about the typical or atypical part, I had a student once who had done some work at a Antarctic research facility. Now, this is something where you might say, well, there just aren't many Antarctic research facilities. There's not a whole lot of additional application. And that is true if you are defining the relevance as just something with the exact same circumstances or something very similar. But although there were some particular dynamics from being in the Antarctic, some of the lessons of this case study are applicable for other isolated places where it's difficult or very time consuming or expensive to get things there. And I might make an analogy to the International Space Station. It is also geographically isolated. It's up there in space. If there's a severe medical emergency, you're going to have to evac to planet Earth, and that's going to be not entirely different from what you would have if you are having a medical emergency in Antarctica. They're going to have to fly you to Argentina or Chile, and that is its own set of things. So for you're selecting any lessons or finding your recommendations that you might be making, think about, well, what here speaks to you? What interests you about this particular innovation and its adoption? I can think of some institutional adoptions that I've seen. There's some that are transparent. You know, when I was an undergrad, when my university upgraded the copy machines on campus, that was relatively smooth as a adoption of innovation. There were more functions, but it was also all the old things looked and did the same. Now, at another university, they upgraded the copy and print system, and now there was all the stuff involving swiping and authentication and all digital layouts instead of the familiar copy buttons. And I'll just say that that was much more disruptive in adopted innovation. And there are some cool things that you could do with that you couldn't with the old system, that were really complicated to do. But it was such that the learning curve was, shall we say, very resource consuming for our faculty, staff, and students to adopt. So whatever this innovation is going to be, make sure you look at both what it's going to be doing, or what it was when it was adopted, whatever its characteristics. Why was it appetizing? Why was there a need to do that? Now, you may disagree about the exact rationale that went with that, but there's some reason why the institution chose to change things, or people within the institution chose to change that. And understanding that may lead you to make a different recommendation, but save that for when you are discussing the consequences, and particularly that desirable or undesirable end. There's a stereotype of salespeople needing to make a quota and people spending on things to make themselves look good rather than to improve the organization. And that may be the case with what you're looking at, and so that'll be part of your critique. And it may be that there were good intentions, but unforeseen consequences. So that's going to go in the unanticipated section if you run into things. I'm reminded of a case where we did a big institutional change to adopt a encryption platform that then turned out to have a fairly significant security thing. So unanticipated costs, undesirable security issue. But why did we want to do that in the first place? Well, we wanted to make things more secure. It just happened that there was an exposed vulnerability that we didn't know about, that had not been discovered or publicized at that point. So the fact that a adoption may have had desirable things does not shield it from having things that are undesirable that you discover along the way. It just did not anticipate. So there may also be some overlap between these sections, and a little cross-referencing is fine, so long as it's adding up to a coherent argument. And that's a pretty good point for us to switch and talk about how to make clear when you are summarizing versus when you are analyzing and synthesizing. Now, in APA style, we always want to be showing the source of the information, the how you know what you know, because this can have a profound effect not just on what other people are able to do with their own research, but also showing how you know, what the gaps and boundaries are, and when you yourself are adding new meaning through your analysis and synthesis. So what is analysis? Well, analysis in the specific sense here, we are referring to when you are assessing or comparing bits of information. If you're writing the literature review for your dissertation and you're looking at a number of different studies on similar or related topics, do they agree? Do they disagree? How were the conditions different, and how might that change things? If we're doing a study of, say, the political orientation of a group, if we're doing this study in, say, eastern Massachusetts versus central Wyoming, there's probably going to be some differences in the results for their general political leanings just based on the geography. Similarly, if we were going to be doing a study of house size and we're looking at San Francisco, where real estate is very, very expensive, versus, we'll say, rural Colorado, where it tends to be much cheaper, you're going to find some rather notable differences. And so you may discover these things and explain, oh, these contrasted, but this one was done here, this was done there, and therefore this is not undermining the point. There's just other things we need to take into account. And you may also be looking at different literature where there are innovations being adopted in different countries that have different health systems. And if you're in, say, the United Kingdom and it's the study of the National Health Service, where it's government-run program, that's very different from how the private hospitals in the United States tend to run. So things like that you point out to the reader and use to make sense of the data when it's not in alignment, and pointing out when it is in alignment and what that might mean. Now, what that might mean is when we move into synthesis, because synthesis is where you combine ideas and other information to create new meaning. A common one being, you're applying it to a new setting. Based on these things that we have seen, for this setting, it appears that, or if the organization is embarking this sort of change again, they should look out for these things. Or perhaps, if another organization is considering doing this, based on their experience, they should or should not. So the recommendations are generally coming out of the synthesis of these saying, if we apply what we know about this to this sort of general setting, here's what you should do. So some of the word choices that help indicate this. So analysis, if you use the language of comparison, this result was similar to this other study, or this aligned with Smith's 2010 findings that blah, or this contrasted with, or these two sources recommended. Now you can also analyze language, and this is where we start delving into the summaries. So you might point out, there were increased costs for this, but 3% is relatively low. That's often less than the standard of inflation, so that's not exactly something that is necessarily prohibitive. Now, you may have other things where it was designed to decrease costs and it made things more expensive. That would be a recommendation to probably not adopt it because it didn't do what was desired. Synthesis, some examples of the kind of phrasing. As a result, the organization should. Based on this, the most appropriate choice is that. Or this is important because reasons, which is just that actions. Or although something, the benefits outweigh that, and therefore we should do X. So this phrasing helps tell the reader that you've moved from summarizing other events and summarizing the information of others to giving your own synthesizing meaning. We also have a whole full-length webinar on this topic, Beyond Summary, Analysis, and Synthesis. If you go to the Writing Center website, you can find that we have many related webinars about paragraph writing and other topics. So if you're having trouble figuring out what to write, or if you've had any comments recommending that you improve the flow or add more critical analysis or synthesis, we have webinars on that can help you out. So I hope that's helpful. You can contact the Writing Center by emailing onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can schedule an appointment online through WC Online and visit the Online Writing Center website. Thank you for joining us.